Hey, and welcome. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Got a lot to get to this hour. A little bit later on in the hour, we'll get to Senator Kamala Harris from California, who was just standing there at a rally when one of her supporters termed the president, quote, mentally retarded. And she sat there and she laughed. And then later she pretended she didn't hear it. We'll get into why it's okay when Democrats do it, apparently. I mean, it didn't used to be okay, but now apparently it's okay. The media making excuses for Kamala Harris. We'll get to that. Plus, we will be taking your phone calls at 855-236-3228, 855-236-3228. We'll take your calls on anything under the sun. But we begin this hour with the news that the supposed negotiations with the Taliban have now fallen apart. For those who are unaware, the United States has been secretly negotiating with the Taliban in the most non-secret fashion for years at this point. The Obama administration negotiated with the Taliban. The Trump administration negotiated with the Taliban, because the fact is that nobody actually has the stones to say it like it is with regard to Afghanistan. The United States should be remaining there as long as it takes to secure the country, at least from the threat of external terrorism. The spread of terrorism from Afghanistan was what caused 9/11 in the first place. You know, John McCain, back in 2008, talked about the fact that if you actually wanted to make Afghanistan safe from terrorism, that would require a military occupation, not with hundreds of thousands of troops, but with some thousands of troops for the foreseeable future. And Barack Obama attacked him. Barack Obama said, no, that's terrible. How could he talk in such a way? And then Barack Obama proceeded to keep thousands of troops there his entire presidency. Well, now President Trump wants to draw down troops from Afghanistan in advance of the 2020 election and basically declare victory in much the same way that Barack Obama wanted to before 2012 and how he did in Iraq prior to 2012 as well. The problem is that there's now a vacuum. I mean, if the United States withdraws, the Taliban are not peace partners. They're not looking to make the country safe and secure. They're not going to guarantee that terrorism will not crop up from Afghanistan toward Western allies or toward the United States. That's just not something that's going to happen. Why? How do we know this? Because the Taliban are still the Taliban. They didn't magically moderate and turn into something worth negotiating with. I mean, we offered them a way out after 9/11. George W. Bush said to them, if you turn over Osama bin Laden, we will not bomb you into oblivion. And they didn't turn him over. They said, no, we had nothing to do with this, but bin Laden's not here. Everything's fine. So we bombed them into oblivion. And Mullah Omar ended up on the run, obviously. Well, now President Trump announced that he has suspended negotiations with the Taliban. Why? Well, because suddenly he has come upon the strange idea that the Taliban are not true peace partners. Here's how all of this went down, according to the New York Times. On the Friday before Labor Day, President Trump gathered top advisors in the Situation Room to consider what could be among the most profound decisions of his presidency: a peace plan with the Taliban after 18 years of grinding bloody war in Afghanistan. The meeting brought to a head a bristling conflict dividing Trump's foreign policy team for months, pitting Secretary of State Mike Pompeo against John Bolton, the national security advisor, in a battle for the competing instincts of a president who relishes tough talk but promised to wind down America's endless wars. As they discussed terms of the agreement, Pompeo and his negotiator, Zalmay Khalilzad, made the case that it would enable Trump to begin withdrawing troops while securing a commitment from the Taliban not to shelter terrorists. Bolton, beaming in by video from Warsaw, where he was visiting, argued that Trump could keep his campaign pledge to draw down forces without getting in bed with killers swathed in American blood. Trump made no decision on the spot, but at some point during the meeting, the idea was floated to finalize the negotiations in Washington, a prospect that appealed to the president's penchant for dramatic spectacle. Trump suggested he would even invite President Ashraf Ghani of Afghanistan, whose government has not been party to the talks, and get him to sign on. Well, it's always going to be awkward when you invite the president of a country that you are partially turning over to a terrorist group to peace talks. And that always gets real awkward. In the days that followed, Trump came up with an even more remarkable idea. He would not only bring the Taliban to Washington, but to Camp David, the crown jewel of the American presidency. The leaders of a rugged militant organization deemed terrorist by the United States would be hosted in the mountain getaway used for presidents, prime ministers, and kings just 3 days before the anniversary of September 11th, which is a terrible, terrible idea. On every optic level, it's a terrible idea. According to the New York Times, thus began an extraordinary few days of ad hoc diplomatic wrangling that upended the talks in a weekend Twitter storm. On display were all of the characteristic traits of the Trump presidency: the yearning ambition for the grand prize, the endless quest to achieve what no other president has achieved, the willingness to defy convention, the volatile mood swings, and the tribal infighting. Love the New York Times editorializing there. What would have been one of the biggest headline-grabbing moments of his tenure was put together on the spur of the moment and then canceled on the spur of the moment. The usual National Security Council process was dispensed with. Only a small circle of advisors was even clued in. And then Trump just went on Twitter and spilled it. So here's what Trump tweeted in the middle of this. Again, if you are engaged in high-risk secret negotiations with a terror group, probably you don't want to go on Twitter and spill it. And it does demonstrate, again, that Trump has an approach to foreign policy and business and politics that is all about personal transactions. It's all about you and I get along, therefore we can make a deal. You see him do this routine with Kim Jong-un. It's why every time he talks with a foreign leader, Trump's first priority is not what's our commonality of interest. His first priority is, do I get along with this human? And that's why if he gets along with Justin Trudeau, and then he walks out going, that Justin Trudeau, nice guy. And then Justin Trudeau's like, yeah, but we didn't get anything done. Trump's like, well, he was a jerk. Because for Trump, it's about the interpersonal relationships. The same thing that makes him a very good retail politician, the same thing that makes him a great TV personality, the fact that he engages with the people that he is speaking to, it's the same thing that on foreign policy doesn't work, because the truth is that personal relationships are not the bases of foreign policy negotiations. Typically, it is the interests of the country or the issues of the groups at issue that are the basis for any sort of real agreement. So Trump tweeted out, unbeknownst to almost everyone, the major Taliban leaders and separately the president of Afghanistan were going to secretly meet with me over at Camp David on Sunday. He says they were coming to the United States tonight. Unfortunately, in order to build false leverage, they admitted to an attack in Kabul that killed one of our great soldiers and 11 other people. I immediately canceled the meeting and called off peace negotiations. Well, question, what changed? There was no ceasefire promised, apparently, so what changed? Did he just realize that the Taliban were mean? He says, what kind of people would kill so many in order to seemingly strengthen their bargaining position? Oh, I don't know, maybe like the Taliban would do that. If I had to put like a mark on, I'd probably say the Taliban. He says, if they cannot agree to a ceasefire during these very important peace talks and would even kill 12 innocent people, they probably don't have the power to negotiate a meaningful agreement anyway. How many more decades are they willing to fight? I mean, you're the one who is basically looking for negotiations to withdraw American troops. The question is not how long the Taliban are willing to fight. They've been willing to do it for 18 years at this point. The question is, how long is America willing to stick around? Because obviously the American people are not super in on this war at this point. According to the New York Times, for Trump, ending the war in Afghanistan has been a focus since taking office, a signature accomplishment that could help him win re-election next year. For nearly a year, Mr. Khalilzad, a former ambassador to Afghanistan, has engaged in talks with the Taliban to make that happen. In recent weeks, it has been increasingly clear that the United States and the Taliban, after 9 rounds of painstaking negotiation in Doha, Qatar, had ironed out most of the issues between them. Khalilzad declared that the agreement document had been finalized in principle. The deal apparently called for a gradual withdrawal of the remaining 14,000 American troops over 16 months, with about 5,000 of them leaving within 135 days. In return, the Taliban would provide counterterrorism assurances to ease American fears of a repeat of September 11th from Afghan soil. Oh, assurances. Assurances. That's always great. Assurances from terrorist groups, they go fantastically well. Ask the Israelis. It always works out fantastic. Get to more of this in just one second. Again, I'm not blaming Trump for this, because the fact is that the American people are of split mind. On the one hand, the American people say they don't want another 9/11. On the other hand, we don't like our troops abroad in foreign countries fighting in endless wars. But what if you actually do need American troops in Afghanistan to ensure that it doesn't decay into what it was before? General David Petraeus, who was responsible for the surge in Iraq and also governed a lot of military policy in Afghanistan, he stated pretty openly that withdrawal of all American forces from Afghanistan should not be the goal. Okay, so again, this Afghanistan policy has never really been clear, nor has it been well thought out, because there is this divide. Just like the same way the American people constantly talk about how they want to cut government spending, and then you're like, okay, let's cut this program. Like, no, we will not do that. The American people are the same way about foreign policy. Like, yeah, isolationism sounds great. Barack Obama promised isolationism. Donald Trump promised isolationism. And then when something bad happens, we're like, well, where was the government? Why didn't the government do anything? It turns out that as you abandon the world to a vacuum, somebody fills the vacuum. Usually it's somebody bad. Apparently, according to the New York Times, the negotiations taking place between the Taliban and the United States left out Afghanistan's government. And the government criticized it for lacking measures that would ensure stability, of course. At home, Trump was cautioned by Lindsey Graham and General Jack Keane and David Petraeus. Bolton was the leading voice against the deal on the inside. Pompeo's allies increasingly tried to isolate Bolton. Bolton apparently argued that Trump could pull out 5,000 troops while still leaving enough forces to assist counterterrorism efforts without any deal with the Taliban. He argued that the Taliban could not be trusted, which of course they can't. In an interview on Sunday, Graham said he shared Trump's desire to end the war in Afghanistan between the Taliban and the Afghan people, but he said that no deal could include withdrawing all American forces or trusting the Taliban to confront al-Qaeda or ISIS. And of course, this is correct. Adam Kinzinger, who's a representative from Illinois, who also happens to have military experience, he says, he served, I believe, in Afghanistan. He says, why exactly are we talking about negotiating with the Taliban in the first place?
A terrorist organization that doesn't recognize nation states, that kills innocent women and children, that denies women the right to really even be in the same room as their husbands is just a minor part of the terrible things that they do. To have them at Camp David is totally unacceptable. The president did the right thing by walking away. I'm very concerned, though, that we were really close to having Taliban leaders there. Nothing wrong with the negotiation, but the president should not be negotiating with these really evil people. We can't forget what they did. We can't forget what they continue to do.
Okay, well, I obviously agree with Kinzinger, and Kinzinger has more reason to say this than I do, considering, again, that he served, I believe, in Afghanistan. According to Graham, he says, my advice to the administration is let's focus on trying to shore up our relationship with Pakistan. He said the Taliban must be prevented from believing they can seek safe harbor in Pakistan. Well, President Trump has now withdrawn because it turns out that the Taliban are bad people who are happy to watch Americans be murdered, and welcoming them to Camp David is a bad idea. I'm glad that Trump withdrew from this particular negotiation. However, the fact that everybody has been fooling themselves that a deal was in the offing in the first place is rather disturbing. We're talking about President Trump and this Afghanistan deal that he was trying to make with the Taliban. It was always foolhardy. I mean, this was going nowhere. Again, that's not unique to Trump. Everybody tries to make a deal with the Taliban, and then everyone realizes, wait a second, aren't those the guys who, defended the guys who perpetrated 9/11? Wasn't it those guys? Yes, it was, in fact, those guys. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, whom I like a lot. Secretary Pompeo was on This Week on ABC, and he was talking about this canceled Camp David summit that President Trump admitted to. And he says, well, I was sort of hoping that the Taliban would change their behavior. Secretary Pompeo, yeah, and I'm hoping that unicorn farts provide all sorts of green energy for all of us. I'm hoping lots of things, but nah.
We finally reached a point where we were close. We'd made real progress, and then the Taliban failed to live up to a series of commitments that they had made. And when that happened, President Trump said, I'm not going to take that deal. I'm not going to work with someone that can't deliver on their commitments, because in the end, George, you know this, a deal, an agreement is just a piece of paper. We have to actually see that change in behavior. I hope it's the case that the Taliban will change their behavior, will recommit to the things that we've been talking to them about for months. In the end, this will be resolved through a series of conversations. I hope the Taliban will agree to meet with the Afghan government.
Yeah, well, the Taliban aren't going to agree to meet with the Afghan government. They don't accept the legitimacy of the Afghan government. A senior Taliban leader, according to the New York Times, said on Sunday that Trump was fooling himself to think he could bring the Taliban and the current president of Afghanistan, Ghani, together at Camp David. He said, we do not recognize the stooge government in Kabul. The Americans were also rushing to finalize outstanding issues in the days before the last-minute proposed Camp David meeting. Among the most significant was a disagreement over the release of thousands of Taliban prisoners in Afghan prisons. So the Taliban, because they're good-hearted people, they wanted all those Taliban prisoners who are terrorists, they wanted all of those people returned to the battlefield. Afghan officials said the Americans had taken the liberty of negotiating on their behalf by agreeing to the release. Oh my God, come on. Ghani's government found that unacceptable, saying it would agree only if the Taliban reciprocated with an extensive ceasefire, something that the Taliban refuses to do since the violence is their leverage. So basically, the United States was trying to make it okay for Taliban soldiers to be released, while the government that holds them captive was suggesting we need a ceasefire, and the Taliban were like, no. Okay, this seems like this was misbegotten from the start. The final negotiations occurred during a period of intensifying bloodshed. In response to Taliban attacks, American negotiators made clear they were prioritizing the agreement, not looking to boycott the talks. Their negotiations were undergirded by increasing battlefield pressure by the American military. When Mr. Khalilzad, that's the American negotiator, and General Austin Miller, the American commander in Afghanistan, returned to Doha, Qatar on Thursday, it was to finalize technical appendices to the main text. The Taliban negotiators got no sense anything was amiss. They later posted on Twitter the atmosphere was good. Same day, however, aides told Trump about a suicide car bomb attack that killed an American soldier and 11 others. At this point, Trump and his team were unified. He could not host Taliban leaders at Camp David just days after an American was killed, even though it was unclear whether the insurgents had actually agreed to come in the first place. This is off. We can't do it, Trump told his aides. There was no announcement made by the White House, but then Trump decided to tweet everything out. Okay, the endgame of the talks seemed near, if not the timetable, but then Trump just started tweeting out about this stuff on Saturday night. American officials stressed the peace drive is not over. The deal had neither been rejected nor accepted. Who the hell knows? Who the hell knows? Now, I will say that, again, I'm not going to blame Trump for the fact that there is no good solution to Afghanistan. There isn't. And there's something hilarious about Democrats criticizing how Trump's carrying on these negotiations when Barack Obama carried on similar negotiations and when they themselves have no actual policy. So Amy Klobuchar, who's the senator from Minnesota, she's on State of the Union on CNN, and she says, you know, this is not a way to conduct foreign policy by tweet. But then she says, yeah, maybe I'd negotiate with the Taliban.
The president has been doing these negotiations fine. I think most people have not questioned that we want to bring our troops home. I want to bring our troops home. It's just the way he does it. You think about trade policy, where he says he's going to slap a bunch of tariffs on August 1st, and then for $300 billion, August 12th, they take back half of them. The next day, he says he's going to reduce taxes, and he changes his mind. The world is watching. China is watching. Russia is watching. They realize the weakness that this creates when we don't have consistency. There is this old saying in foreign policy and in trade negotiation, keep your promises and keep your threats. He keeps neither.
Okay, well, the problem is that neither did Barack Obama. And when it comes to Afghanistan policy, the real problem is that the American people, we have to make up our minds. We have to make up our minds. Now, there are folks I know, foreign policy experts like Angelo Codevilla over at the Claremont Institute. His suggestion is we withdraw our troops. If the Taliban take over and then they commit another terrorist attack, we go in and we eviscerate them again. In other words, we can't stop every terror attack. And if terror attacks occur, then we have to go back in. Okay, but are the American people willing to accept that? We have to have a hard-headed conversation about what it is that we want. Are we interested in stopping future attacks at the cost of hundreds or maybe thousands of American lives? Or are we willing to accept the cost that maybe there will be future attacks if we don't have American soldiers over there? These are real decisions we're going to have to make. And there's not going to be a solution to that Kobayashi Maru problem, an easy way out, just by delegating everything to the Taliban and saying, oh, we cut a peace deal with the Taliban, so everything's fine now. That's a sucker's play. Well, there's a new poll out from the Washington Post talking about how many Americans support various forms of gun control. And typically, these polls don't mean a whole hell of a lot because the truth is that they ask these kind of broad top-line questions and people say they support gun control, and then they get the details, and then they don't support them nearly as much. So, for example, according to this Washington Post poll, 89% of Americans say they support requiring background checks for all potential gun buyers. Well, if that includes people who are members of your family, like your wife does not happen to have a gun license from a particular state, and you leave town, and so you say, well, you know, the combo to the safe, sweetheart, is this. If someone comes in, shoot them. Apparently, that would be illegal under the universal background check provisions being put forward. You ask people in that way, and suddenly the support is going to drop from 89% way down. Well, how about support for a nationwide ban on sale of assault weapons? This one the Democrats have been focusing on in heavy fashion. That only has 56% support, including just 55% support from independents and 33% support from Republicans. How about a nationwide ban on high-capacity ammo clips with more than 10 bullets? Presumably they mean magazines with more than 10 bullets. That is supported by about 60% of Americans. But the truth is that those Americans are going to largely be centralized in areas where there's already gun control, preventing you from having magazines that have more than 10 rounds inside of them. As far as a mandatory buyback program, 52% of Americans say they support a mandatory buyback program to turn in all assault weapons for payment. I highly doubt that the survey question asked how they would feel about police going door to door to require you to turn over your guns. Again, it's difficult to poll Americans on broad issues. It is much easier to poll Americans on what they think when you're very specific about it, which is why pollsters don't like to ask very specific questions. Typically, it doesn't give them the sort of progressive answers they're looking for. All right, time to take your calls at 855-236-3228. Alex in Colorado, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Alex.
Hey, love the show. So my question for you is, how are racketeering laws, such as those laid out by the RICO Act or the domestic terrorism provisions in the Patriot Act, how are those not unconstitutional via freedom of assembly in the First Amendment?
Right. So, Alex, the RICO Act specifically targets a corrupt endeavor, and the corrupt endeavor must be a criminal enterprise in which you have undertaken a first step toward conspiracy. What that means is that getting together and talking about things isn't enough. You have to have an actual plan to carry forth a criminal conspiracy. So it's not the act of assembly that is illegal. It is the criminal conspiracy you are pursuing, and there must be an overt act in pursuit of that conspiracy according to the actual RICO law. Alex, I appreciate the call. See, Tommy in Houston, Texas, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Tommy.
Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
Listen, Ben, I'm going to vote for Trump in 2020. I hope he wins. But who is in the wings after Trump? That's what I'm worried about.
Well,
Republican, Democrat, I just don't want the same crappy games. I want a leader, person in there that's going to pull the strings like Trump.
Yeah, there are a bunch of candidates who are up for that possibility. Obviously, I think it's pretty obvious that Mike Pence would probably run if Trump serves a second term. If Trump doesn't serve a second term, by the way, I wouldn't count out Trump running in 2024. If President Trump loses in 2020, I wouldn't count him out running again, considering that he really, really doesn't like to go out on a bad note. But some of the other candidates who I think would be up for it, Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, obviously wants to run. Nikki Haley, the former ambassador to the United Nations under President Trump, definitely would like to run. I think that you would see a run from probably Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas. You might see a run from Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. There are a lot of young, up-and-coming Republicans who'd be interesting. I don't think you're going to see a significant run from any of the 2016 candidates again, although I could be wrong. Obviously, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio still wait in the wings, but there are a bevy of Republicans who are out there who are definitely going to compete, Tommy.
Yeah, I actually didn't even think about Abbott until you said that's the reason I was asking. So anyway, I appreciate you taking my call, bud.
Hey, you bet, Tommy. I appreciate you listening. Thanks so much. Matt in Boston, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Matt.
Holy smokes, I'm talking to Ben Shapiro. Okay, I got a question for you. What is the best way to combat anti-Semitism from increasingly the mainstream left and the radical right? Because I think it's hard for us to make the claim that we're like against anti-Semitism when at the straight pride parade you had some creepo flashing a swastika everywhere when the rest of us are waving around Israeli flags. I marched in it, by the way.
Well, Matt, I think that the only thing you can do is call people out when they engage in anti-Semitism in much the same way that we call people out when they engage in racism. The problem that I see is folks on the right who want to pretend like there's nothing on the fringe right that's happening, and folks on the left who not only make room for Ilhan Omar, but celebrate Ilhan Omar, celebrate Rashida Tlaib, celebrate Linda Sarsour. This is, obviously much scarier to me. Now, the relative threats are different. So if I'm worried about who's going to come to my synagogue and shoot up my synagogue, I'm usually worried about a white supremacist or an Islamic terrorist. Just historically speaking, those are the people who tend to shoot up synagogues, not left-wing anti-Semites. If I'm worried about the full-on takeover of a political party by anti-Semites, I'm much more worried about Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib taking the lead and conflating anti-Semitism with a general opposition to Israeli policy that is felt by a lot of Democrats, but there are a lot of Democrats who may not like Benjamin Netanyahu.
And then they
just
try to make
Israel.
that socially acceptable, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think that on the mainstream left, anti-Semitism is becoming socially acceptable because the Jews don't tend to fit into the intersectional hierarchy, just like I think that anti-Asian rhetoric on the left will become socially acceptable in short order because Asians are too successful to be successfully considered part of the intersectional hierarchy. Matt, really appreciate the call. Samantha in Illinois, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Samantha.
Hi, Ben. So I've been wanting to get involved with writing about politics for a while, but I'm afraid I just don't have enough expertise because I don't have a poli-sci degree. And while I know you said before that getting a degree isn't always necessary, I'm afraid it makes me seem so unqualified. What do you think I should do?
No, Samantha, I don't think being an expert on politics has anything to do with a poli-sci degree. I have a poli-sci degree, and I can tell you it is one of the more useless things that I have. I mean, I was reading about politics before I had a poli-sci degree. I was reading about politics after. You don't learn much with a poli-sci degree that you can't learn from reading the Federalist Papers or the newspaper every day, maybe a couple of books on the inner workings of House committees. But the general idea that you learn politics from poli-sci I don't think is right. In fact, many of the greatest commentators in American politics are not poli-sci majors, right? Charles Krauthammer was a psychologist or a psychiatrist. He was an actual med school graduate. You've seen people, I don't believe George Will is a poli-sci graduate. I think he's a philosophy grad. So there are a lot of ways to get into politics. Like Donald Trump certainly isn't a poli-sci grad. I don't think that you have to be a poli-sci major in order to study politics. I think most people are politically interested. The question is what kind of reading you do in your spare time and how you educate yourself, Samantha.
Yeah, I just worry that there's only so much I can learn from books and that a degree builds more critical thinking skills. I worry about then my area of expertise would be limited.
Yeah, well, again, I think that there are ways that you can volunteer. You can go work for a congressperson if you're interested in learning about politics. You can sign up with the local Republican Party, and you can do some of that. But again, I think you might be mistaken about what a poli-sci degree actually is, and that is a bunch of classes on international relations or maybe a few classes on domestic checks and balances. But honestly, I cannot tell you, Samantha, exactly what I learned in poli-sci because I frankly don't remember it. I mean, there are just too many classes that are a complete waste of time in which the professor spouts propaganda. Samantha, really appreciate the call. Jordan in San Jose, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Jordan.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
Doing well. Go for it.
So my boyfriend and I have both been following the Hong Kong protests, and it seems like they're using a lot of Antifa-ish tactics, and I wanted to get your opinion on that.
What do you mean by Antifa tactics? I haven't seen them clubbing people in the streets, but what exactly are we referring to?
So they're vandalizing businesses. We've seen them basically attack Mainlander reporters, stuff like that. It's not really getting reported over here a lot.
Yeah, Jordan, obviously that stuff is not only wrong. You've seen, I think, the leadership of a lot of Hong Kong's sort of protest movement condemning that sort of stuff because they realize that it earns them bad press. The Chinese media were making a lot out of, for example, attacks on reporters, as well they should. And I think the Hong Kong protest leaders were very opposed to it. As far as attacking private businesses, that's a mistake too, especially because, again, it's private businesses that have made Hong Kong what it is, which is an island of semi-freedom in an area of complete tyranny. Overall, I don't think that the Hong Kong protests are oriented the same way as Antifa. But yeah, I think that, protest leaders in general should obviously urge people to engage in nonviolent protest. Engaging in violent protests, particularly against businesses, is a waste of time. Jordan, I really appreciate the call. Adam in Florida, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Adam.
Holy schmack, dude. I cannot believe oh my gosh. Anyway, my question is, I just wanted to ask, what candidates are you looking forward to running in 2024 on the right side of the aisle?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think Greg Abbott, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, there's Doug Ducey in Arizona. I think there are a bunch of great Republican governors and a few ex-Trump administration staffers who I think are quite good.
All right, that's cool. I just have one more question, if you don't mind.
Sure, go for it.
I'm a senior in high school, and everyone is just very hostile to my people who share my opinion. Do you ever think that this will stop? I just have really no hope anymore.
Yeah, it's very difficult, Adam, and I really appreciate the call. It's very difficult. I think that the left is hell-bent in many ways on shutting down conversation and making themselves feel better by doing so. It's really ugly and it's really terrible, and I talk to lots of young people like you who feel like they can't even hold the conversation with folks. And the left, I think, is getting worse on this score. I do think there will come a point where people just get tired of this. And you're seeing this with Dave Chappelle. You're seeing it with Aziz Ansari. You're seeing it with Sarah Silverman. It's starting in the comic community because left-wing comics still have to push the envelope a little bit to be funny. But I think that you're going to see it bleed over into the mainstream. It's an annoying way of life. And the folks on the left have become incredibly annoying. They become incredibly irritating. They're there to scold you and make you feel bad about yourself. And increasingly, they're putting Americans to the choice. Either we can have politically segregated communities where you never have a conversation across the aisle, or they're going to have to stop doing this and stop being obnoxious. And I do have hope that the second will be true, that eventually the left will just get so tired of itself that they stop with this nonsense. Adam, hang in there. I know that it's rough out there. It is very annoying.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking my call. Thank you.
All righty. William in Texas. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, William.
How you doing, Ben? Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, go for it, dude.
All right, awesome. I actually want to talk more about this White House press briefing that happened today with the Border Patrol commissioner. And I want to know, why aren't Republicans actually doing more of that? Because the commissioner, what he did today was go on a left wing and a Democrat debunk-a-thon for an hour. He took it to the press and briefed the American people. That's exactly what we need more of.
Yeah, William, I totally agree with you, obviously. Yeah, William, thanks for the call. I totally agree with you. I mean, I think that putting experts in a position to debunk left-wing talking points is definitely great because, President Trump likes to be in the spotlight a lot, but the fact is that he doesn't always know the most about the topics about which he is speaking. Why not just appeal to the people who are standing right next to you who are briefing you? I totally agree with this, William, and I really appreciate the call. Okay, well, you know that actors are pandering when they decide that it's time to say that there's a female James Bond. We need a female James Bond. Now, as I've said before, it's one thing, like the new movie is supposed to have a female 007. Well, that is not James Bond. That's a person who is filling the role of 007, which is the slot number of the agent. But the entire James Bond brand, the entire Ian Fleming brand is built around the supposed toxic masculinity of James Bond. I mean, let's be real about this. James Bond is a character who womanizes and who drinks heavily and who shoots people and typifies some of the more typical sort of male instincts, right? Aggressive violence, need for promiscuous sex with beautiful women, right? He is a fulfillment fantasy for men. That is what James Bond was, is, always will be. And it doesn't work if James Bond is a woman. Why? Because women don't operate in the same way as men. This is particularly true when it comes to the sexual aspect of James Bond's character, right? James Bond, what's supposed to be so great about James Bond is that he's able to get any beautiful woman into bed. Well, okay, make James Bond a beautiful woman, and what exactly is the challenge? What, like, a beautiful woman getting a guy into bed? That's called, like, just standing there. Really, like, a man getting a beautiful woman into bed requires a little bit of wooing. It requires a little bit of a story arc. A woman wanting to get a guy into bed requires pretty much her saying, be here at this particular time. That's not how this character works. But Pierce Brosnan is out there trying to pander to the woke crowd. He's saying, it's time to have a female James Bond. They did. It was called Atomic Blonde, and the movie did no business. Because basically Charlize Theron's character was male James Bond, female James Bond. And the movie didn't work in that particular way. It worked for what it was, but it didn't work in the same way as James Bond, obviously. Pierce Brosnan says it would be exciting for the next 007 to be a woman. I think that would be really exciting for the next 007. They should really go all the way. The next James Bond, not 007, the next James Bond should actually be a hideous woman. Not just a woman, like a very not good-looking woman. Right? It should be like Kathy Bates. Like, it should be Kathy Bates. And I think that'd be great. Because then, I mean, obviously, we don't have to have any of the original dynamics of the films, and we don't have to have any of the original dynamics of the characters. In fact, we don't have to have this make sense in any way, but that would be the wokest. In fact, you know what the best thing to do would be? Why not have a transgender man as James Bond? Like a biological woman who's not good looking, though, but like a biological woman, not good looking, who believes that she is a man. And then we can really do this thing right. And in fact, I think that we should really woke this thing up. We should have this person be disabled in some way. Because why should James Bond, it seems ableist, frankly, to have James Bond be a very athletic person who runs around and shoots people. Why not have that person be like Professor X? I mean, just put the person in a wheelchair. It shouldn't change the dynamic of the series. And if you suggest that it is, it's because you're ableist, obviously. This is so stupid in every possible way. I love how the Huffington Post writes this up. Brosnan said, quote, I think we've watched the guys do it for the last 40 years. Get out of the way, guys, and put a woman up there. Did it ever occur to him that maybe the reason we watched a guy do it for the last 40 years is because the character's a guy? Maybe that'd be it. It's like, you know what? We should recast the movie Jaws, but instead of a shark, it should be a guppy. That's what we should do. It should just be a guppy. I mean, we've watched a shark do it for so many years. Let's make it a guppy, man. Does that really change anything? It turns out when you write art, sometimes the characters are supposed to be the characters. And the qualities of the characters are their qualities. He says, I think it would be exhilarating. It would be exciting. Okay, Pierce, then why don't you put up the money for it? Really, it's funny. None of the people who suggest that a female James Bond should be a thing are willing to actually fund this movie themselves. You could do it. Pierce Brosnan's a very rich dude with a lot of industry contacts. Why not? Why not? Buy the rights. Fans have been pushing for a female 007 to star in the franchise's next film, No Time to Die, which will hit theaters in April, according to the Huffington Post. Really? Which fans? Is it the biggest Bond fans who have been pushing for that? Or is that like the blue check marks on Twitter? British actor Lashana Lynch has been rumored to play a female Bond in the movie, but there's been no confirmation. That's not true. She's been rumored to play 007, obviously. Brosnan says, the Me Too movement has been relevant and significant and well needed in our society, so we'll have to address that also. I think that they should open the new Bond film with Bond apologizing to all the women he's ever slept with. Like Aziz Ansari at the beginning of his Netflix special. I completely misinterpreted a lot of those moves, and I apologize at the outset for everything. I'm never going to open the door for a woman, or frankly, sleep with a woman ever again. In fact, I am a woman. This is going to go great, guys. Really, I think this is spectacular. Now, the Broccoli family, which apparently has the rights to the movies, the producers, Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, they say this is not happening. Barbara Broccoli told The Guardian Bond is a male character. He was written as a male. I think he'll probably stay as a male. And that's fine, Broccoli said. We don't have to turn male characters into women. Let's just create more female characters and make the story fit those female characters. Yes, this would be the reasonable thing to do. Or we could just virtue signal about how women are exactly the same as men in every possible way. And when a woman punches a man, it's generally the same thing as when a man punches a woman, which obviously is not true, which is why men should never punch women. And when a woman has sex with a man, it's obviously the same for the man and the woman. And all of this is not good for Broccoli, okay? She's the one who's got her money on the line. But obviously, she's just internalized the patriarchy. That's all that happened here. Internalization of the patriarchy. Alrighty, coming up, we're going to get into slow Joe Biden, who's fading into the mists of time. This is the Ben Shapiro Show.